Well, hello everyone and welcome. I'm Graham Hudson, the chair of the eAA, and we're here today to talk about how to write a conference submission that gets approved. One of the most common reasons good ideas don't make it into the conference program isn't because of lack of expertise, it's that the submission doesn't quite make the case clearly enough. So I'm joined today by Stuart Shaw, one of the eAA's board of directors, and Stuart has extensive experience in looking at submissions for conferences, and today we're going to talk about how the scrutiny committee looks at submissions, what they think, and what makes a good proposal stand out. Now, Stuart has a lot of experience in this area. He chairs the scientific committee of the Association for Educational Assessment in Europe, selecting papers for that prestigious conference. And he's the honorary associate professor of the University of College London in the Institute of Education, and is chair of the Board of Trustees of the Chartered Institute of Educational Assessors, as well as being a respected researcher and author. So welcome, Stuart.
Thank you, Graham.
So the first thing we're going to talk about is the relevance of the submission to the conference theme. So, Stuart, when you read a submission, how quickly do you form a view on whether it fits the conference theme?
Well, really quite quickly. A fundamental consideration for any reviewer is the relevance of the submission to the conference theme. Relevance should be immediately apparent in the text from the very outset. Reviewers will inevitably ask, is this clearly framed for this conference this year? And of course, conference themes change year on year. A very common mistake is assuming that the relevance is either obvious or not that important. But I think it's important to say that strong submissions spell out explicitly, again from the beginning, this session addresses the conference theme by, and the text follows.
So you're not just judging whether the topic is interesting?
No, you're not. Many topics are, of course, very interesting, but we're judging fit. Submissions that explicitly reference the theme and subtheme almost always score more highly.
Now, that's very interesting, clearly a very important point, and as you say, one that can often be overlooked. So one of the other criteria that we're looking at is, so what's the clarity of purpose and the learning outcomes? So what do you think reviewers struggle with the most here?
Well, clearly, cohesion and clarity, comprehensiveness are important. And if a submission is not clear, then reviewers are going to struggle to retrieve the most important meaning from it. So vagueness is something that we are very much aware of. And this is manifest in certain phrases like "we will explore" or "we will discuss." These types of phrase don't really convey very much information at all. Instead, submissions need to make very clear what will delegates take away from the presentation. And I think by far and away, the strongest submissions will usually include 2 or 3 very clear outcomes: what people will learn, what people understand, or be able to apply. And these are important considerations.
Okay, I mean, that's a really interesting point, isn't it? So what you're saying is it's less about describing the topic and more about describing the value of it.
Yes, this is not to denigrate the importance of the topic or the breadth and depth of the topic. Topic is important, but describing the value of the submission should take primacy.
Yeah.
Reviewers are constantly asking, why should someone attend this session rather than perhaps another one running at the same time?
Yeah, that's really good. That's really important. And of course, when we run the parallel sessions and so on at the conference, actually making that choice is quite hard, isn't it? So it's a really important point. So thanks for that. And let's think about one of the other criteria that we're looking at, which is the depth and quality of the content. So, you know, how do you tell whether a proposal has real depth just from what people are writing?
Well, quality and depth, despite very prescribed criteria, are often subjective. And depth invariably manifests itself through specificity. Very strong proposals reference evidence, real projects or data, evaluation findings, outcomes, research insights, which are always very valuable, and lessons learned. Quite often, a research project, for example, may not be successful, but important, insightful, rich lessons can be garnered from the experience. Weak submissions stay at, if you like, a headline level. They describe what happened, but not what was learned or why it in fact matters.
Yeah. So experience in that respect isn't enough.
Experience is clearly very important, but reflection constitutes an integral feature of the impact and the efficacy of the submission, and is what reviewers are really looking for. Self-reflection, reflecting upon what you've written, why you've written it that way. Why did you discover that others can learn from? What did you discover others can learn from? This is an important question, and this relates to how generalizable the findings reported are and how they can be, if you like, extrapolated to different contexts and also different audiences.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, Stuart. Yeah, I'm sure people listening to this are going to find that really helpful, and it's an important area to focus on as well. And I mean, the next one, over the years that I've presented at conferences, particularly when I used to work for commercial organizations, was one that we sort of struggled, which was avoiding the sales pitch. And of course, many people coming to the conference will have that background, but nevertheless have valid things to talk about. So, how do we avoid that sales pitch, and what's in the committee's mind when they're looking at submissions?
I can say in all honesty that most reviewers are looking for quality and depth and the sort of characteristics and features that we've been talking about. Now, I'm not anti-industry or business. Reviewers, however, are pro-learning, and I think there is a tendency, sometimes, not always, for a submission to degenerate into, if you like, a product promotion. And that is a huge distraction and can often be important because it will detract from the essence of what it is the submission is trying to achieve. If a submission, for example, reads like a marketing copy, then it immediately will raise a red flag. And would-be submitters need to attend to this issue very carefully and very closely. Now, I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't necessarily make allusions to products or companies. It doesn't mean you can't reference them, but I think the essential focal points of interest must ultimately embrace insight, evidence, and of course learning.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I mean, I've obviously read quite a lot of these as well, and if you see that bit that looks like it's just taken out of a sales brochure, it tends to colour your view of things. So it's a really good point. So what would you say is a good rule of thumb here?
Well, this is always very difficult, and again, I just want to reiterate the point that sometimes organizations, affiliations, and products can be mentioned, but I think if the session would still be valuable and considered to be valuable, if the company name were removed, you're probably on safe ground.
Yeah, that's a good tip there, Stuart. So thanks for that. So another area, of course, is how the submission and proposed presentation is going to engage the audience and what interactivity there might be with the audience. So what do you think helps here when the submission is being put in?
Well, engagement with the submission is hugely important, and it relates very closely, I believe, with purpose. The two are inextricably linked. Reviewers tend to look for what consideration has been given about the audience that the submission is very likely to attract. Now, you can't legislate for every kind of audience, but in the main, I think you know who you want to convey information to and the nature of that audience. Explicit indications about audience really ought to appear in the submission text.
Right.
Reviewers do like to see that presenters have thought about the audience and not just simply the content. Now, this might well be instantiated in the text and manifest itself as a planned question and answer, perhaps short discussion prompts, polling, or case-based questions. But I think, again, importantly, successful submissions are not given over to gimmicks, just intentional engagement.
No, that's really helpful. No, some good points there. Thank you very much for that. And then just one of the other areas, which is what sort of format should the presentation be, and how can that be conveyed? I mean, do you find that submissions often fail because the wrong format's being put forward?
Well, unfortunately, more often than people actually realize. For example, some topics clearly need a panel. Others might benefit from certain kinds of interaction. Strong submissions explain why the chosen format is the best way to explore the topic.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. So it's really grounding it in, the reason for doing it and the reason for that way. I can see that. So, no, that's very helpful. Thank you for that. So, last criterion really is about originality and impact. And sometimes I think this can be a bit confusing for people, that they feel that they have to bring forward something new in order to get it accepted. So do they have to be completely new to score well?
It's the heart's desire of any researcher to produce something seminal, something important, and something original. That's not always going to happen, of course. So not at all. But they do need a fresh perspective, perhaps a new insight, a golden moment, as I call it, a new angle, updated evidence, or honest reflection on what perhaps did, but more importantly, did not work. This does not necessarily mean that the submission is highly original or a seminal contribution to the literature or to the world of e-assessment more generally, though such a submission would always be welcomed. A final thought, crucially important question that really most reviewers will ask is, will this session meaningfully contribute to the conference conversation? Are people going to walk away asking questions? Some of the best presentations I've been to, I've often disagreed with, but actually I've gone away and thinking, well, you know something, that presenter has a point. I need to reflect upon that. Would-be submitters will need to discern for themselves how meaningful their contribution is, and then really emphasize this in the text of their submission. Yeah,
no, that's a really good point. And I mean, sometimes people have come back as a follow-up submission to something that's been done previously, but as you say, added extra insight and value to it. So I can see that. So thank you ever so much for that too. So maybe just a bit of closing advice. If you had one piece of advice, your top tip for somebody submitting, what would that be?
Well, this is always very difficult, but if you can imagine you're a reviewer of your own submission, when you're crafting, constructing, and reviewing your own submission, you need to view it through the lens or the prism of the reviewer, as if you're actually, in fact, sitting on the scrutiny committee, and ask yourself the following questions. Is the value obvious? Is the learning clear? Is the focus on insight and outcomes rather than promotion? And I think if you can confidently answer yes to these questions, you've almost certainly written a very strong proposal. Yeah,
fantastic. Look, I think that's a great note to end on. And thank you for Stuart. Thank you, Stuart, for joining us. I think it's a really helpful conversation. I hope you have found this helpful watching this short recording, and we look forward to receiving your submissions. Please look through the program, try and choose that theme or sub-theme that you think fits with what you're doing currently. And don't forget, you can reach out to us here at the eAA and the eAA team at any time if you've got further questions or queries. And we look forward to the submissions, and obviously we look forward to seeing you at the conference. Thanks very much.